Dad, it's too hard for you now. Let me handle the property. Those 8 words cost me everything I'd built over 30 years. My own son, the boy I'd carried on my shoulders, whose college I'd paid for, looked me dead in the eye and threw me out like broken furniture. He thought I'd shuffle away quietly, another discarded old man with nowhere to go. He was wrong. Arrogance must be punished and justice restored. You have no idea what was coming for him. Before we continue, please subscribe to stay updated on our latest stories and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. The barbecue smoke drifted lazily through the pine trees at our family cabin, mixing with the sound of laughter and clinking beer bottles. It was Steve's birthday weekend, his 35th, and for once, everything felt perfect. The whole family was here. Steve and Michelle, their kids playing by the lake, even my brother Bob had driven up from the city. I stood by the grill flipping steaks and watching my grandson chase fireflies in the fading sunlight. This was what I'd worked for all those years, moments like this. The cabin I'd bought 5 years ago as a family retreat, the successful business that gave us all security, the rental properties that would ensure the kids' college funds were covered. Dad, these steaks smell incredible, Steve called out, walking over with 2 cold beers. He handed me one and clinked his bottle against mine. Just like when I was a kid. His voice carried that genuine warmth I remembered from his childhood. No pretense, no agenda, just a son appreciating his father. It made my chest swell with pride. I smiled, remembering all those camping trips when money was tight, but we made it work anyway. Your mother always said I was better at grilling than running a business, I joked. Good thing I learned to build a solid foundation in both. Steve laughed, but then his expression grew more thoughtful. His brow furrowed slightly, the same way it did when he was a kid trying to solve a math problem. Speaking of the business, I've been thinking about something. Michelle appeared beside us, sliding her arm around Steve's waist. Her timing seemed too perfect, like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. We both have, actually. There was something rehearsed about the way she said it, but I pushed the thought aside. Maybe I was just getting paranoid in my old age. I raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of beer. Oh, what's on your minds? Well, Steve started, his tone casual and warm. You've been carrying this load for 30 years, Dad. The company, the properties, all those headaches. Don't you think it's time you got to enjoy the fruits of your labor? He gestured with his beer, his movements animated. I could see Michelle watching his every word, nodding along like a supportive audience member at a play. The evening breeze rustled through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, the kids were squealing with delight as they caught their first firefly of the night. I mean, look at this. Michelle gestured around us, her voice taking on that sweet, persuasive tone she used when she wanted something. This is what life should be about. Relaxation, family time, no stress about tenant calls or construction deadlines. I watched her face as she spoke. Her smile was picture perfect, but her eyes held a calculating gleam that reminded me of contractors who quoted one price and delivered another. I nodded slowly. They had a point. The business had been consuming more of my time lately, and I was getting tired of the constant phone calls, the paperwork, the responsibility. You know, every good foreman knows when it's time to pass the tools to the next generation, I said. What are you suggesting? I asked, though part of me already knew where this was heading. Steve's face lit up with that boyish enthusiasm I remembered from his childhood. But there was something else there now. Hunger. Like a man eyeing a prime piece of real estate. Let me take over everything, Dad. The business, the rental properties, all of it. You've trained me well. I know I can handle it. And you? You can finally do all those things you've been putting off. Travel, hobbies, maybe even dating again. The suggestion hung in the warm evening air. Around us, the family continued their celebration, unaware of the life-changing conversation happening by the grill. I've already had lawyers draw up the paperwork, Michelle added, her voice gentle but efficient, like she was discussing weekend plans instead of dismantling my life's work. Just a simple power of attorney transfer, clean and easy. Something cold settled in my stomach, but I ignored it. This was family. This was my son offering to take the burden off my shoulders. I looked at Steve, successful, confident, capable. He'd been helping run the business for 2 years now, and he was good at it. Really good. Maybe it was time to step back. Maybe they were right. Well, I always said a smart builder knows when the foundation is strong enough to support the next floor, I mused. You know what? I said, surprised by my own words. Maybe you're right. Maybe it is time. The smile that spread across Steve's face was radiant, but I caught Michelle squeezing his arm, a quick, victorious gesture. Really, Dad? You mean it? Yeah, I heard myself saying. Let's do it. Can't keep mixing cement forever, right? We shook hands there by the grill, father and son, sealing what I thought was a generous gift and the beginning of my peaceful retirement. The steaks sizzled, the family laughed, and everything felt exactly as it should be. I had no idea I'd just handed them the sledgehammer to demolish everything I'd built. The morning sun streamed through the cabin windows as Bob and I sat at the kitchen table, nursing our coffee and splitting the Sunday crossword puzzle. It was one of those peaceful moments that made all the years of hard work worthwhile. Just two brothers sharing a quiet morning. 7 across, Bob muttered, tapping his pen against the paper. Foundation expert. 9 letters. I chuckled, taking a sip of my coffee. Architect, maybe? Though in my line of work, I'd say the guy who shows up when it's already too late. Bob laughed, shaking his head. 30 years in construction and you still talk like you're just swinging a hammer. That's because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, I said. Honest work, solid results. You can dress it up with fancy titles, but... The kitchen door swung open and Steve walked in. Gone was last night's warm, celebratory demeanor. His face was all business now, cold and calculating. It was like watching someone flip a switch. Morning, Dad. Uncle Bob. His tone was clipped, professional. The same voice he used with subcontractors who were behind schedule. Bob looked up from the crossword, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Morning, Steve. Sleep well? Fine. Steve poured himself coffee, his movements sharp and efficient. Dad, we need to discuss the transition timeline. I blinked, confused by the sudden change. Last night we'd been celebrating. Now he sounded like we were negotiating a hostile takeover. Timeline, son? We just shook hands on this 12 hours ago. What's the rush? Steve turned to face us, leaning against the counter. His posture was different, dominant, territorial, like he was claiming space that was already his. The rush is efficiency, Dad. No point dragging this out unnecessarily. Bob's pen stopped moving across the puzzle. I could see him studying Steve's face, his expression growing concerned. I've already called the bank, Steve continued, his voice matter of fact. They'll need your signature on some additional forms. Transfer of business accounts, updating the property deeds, standard stuff. Something cold crawled up my spine. Additional forms? I thought you said it was just a simple power of attorney. Steve's smile was thin, lacking any warmth. It reminded me of those contractors who smiled while they explained why your quote had mysteriously doubled. That was just the beginning, Dad. To do this properly, we need full legal transfer. Clean slate. Clean slate of what exactly? Bob interjected, his voice carrying an edge I recognized from our childhood. It was the tone he used right before a fight. Steve's eyes flicked to Bob with mild irritation, like he was an inconvenient third party in a private negotiation. Uncle Bob, this is really between Dad and me. Like hell it is, Bob shot back, setting down his pen with a sharp click. This is family business, and something doesn't smell right. I watched Steve's face carefully. The mask was slipping, revealing something underneath that I didn't recognize. Or maybe I just never wanted to see it before. Look, Steve said, his patience clearly wearing thin. The bottom line is simple. Dad's getting older, the business needs younger leadership, and it's time for a complete transition. Not a gradual handoff, a complete one. And what does that mean for me? I asked quietly. Steve met my eyes directly, and for a moment, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was the look of a man who'd already won and was tired of pretending otherwise. It means when we get back to the city, you'll need to pack your things and find somewhere else to live. The house comes with the business assets. It's all connected. The kitchen fell dead silent. Even the birds outside seemed to stop singing. Bob exploded from his chair. Are you out of your goddamn mind? That's his house! He built that place with his own hands. But I held up a hand, stopping my brother mid-rant. Something had shifted inside me, like tumblers falling into place in a lock. The fog of confusion was clearing, and what I saw underneath was crystal clear. No, Bob, I said quietly, my voice steady as bedrock. Let him finish. I want to hear what my son has to say. Steve's expression hardened completely now, all pretense gone. What I'm saying is that it's time for you to step aside completely. The business, the properties, the house, it's all part of the same package. You wanted to retire? Well, this is what retirement looks like. The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. My own son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd trusted with everything, had just told me to get out of my own life. Bob was shaking with rage, but I remained perfectly still. Inside, something was crystallizing, something hard and cold and absolutely certain. I heard you, son, I said finally. I heard you loud and clear. Steve pushed back from the counter, that cold smile playing across his lips like he'd just closed the deal of a lifetime. It was the same expression he wore when he landed a big contract, satisfied, superior, already counting his profits. Good talk, Dad, he said, his tone dripping with false warmth. I'm glad we're all on the same page now. He walked toward the door, pausing just long enough to look back at us. The smile widened, showing teeth. Michelle and I are heading back to the city this afternoon to get everything started. Enjoy your last day at the cabin. The door swung shut behind him with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid closing. Bob and I sat in the heavy silence that followed, the morning sunshine suddenly feeling cold through the windows. My brother's face was red with barely contained fury, his hands clenched into fists on the table. That little bastard, Bob finally exploded, slamming his palm against the table. The coffee cups jumped. After everything you've done for him, the ungrateful, scheming. Bob, I said quietly, holding up a hand. My voice was calm, but inside something was churning like a concrete mixer. Let me think. I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me. 32 years ago, buying that first piece of land with money I'd saved from working double shifts. The blisters on my hands from mixing concrete by hand because I couldn't afford a machine yet. The nights spent drawing blueprints at the kitchen table, sketching out a future I could barely imagine. I remembered Steve at 5 years old, wearing a hard hat that was too big for his head, helping me install drywall, teaching him to read a level when he was 8, showing him how to calculate square footage when he was 12. Every lesson, every patient explanation, every skill I'd passed down, all of it building toward this moment of betrayal. You know what the worst part is? I said, opening my eyes to meet Bob's concerned gaze. What? I built 12 rental properties with these hands. I held them up, studying the scars and calluses like a roadmap of my life. 12. Each one took months of 16-hour days. I remember mixing concrete for the foundation of the first one until my back felt like it would snap in half. Bob nodded, his anger cooling into something more focused. He knew these stories. He'd helped with some of his early projects. I started with nothing, Bob. Nothing but a willingness to outwork anyone who stood in my way. No trust fund, no family money, no shortcuts. My voice was steady, but underneath it was steel. Every nail I drove, every wall I framed, every roof I put on, it was for him. For my family. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the lake where my grandson had been catching fireflies just yesterday. I put Steve through college, $120,000, not counting his living expenses, his car, his spring break trips to Cancun. I remember, Bob said quietly. I gave him his first job at the company, taught him everything I knew. When he wanted to marry Michelle, I paid for the wedding. $35,000 for one day because my daughter-in-law wanted something special. The numbers kept coming, each one a nail in the coffin of my naive trust. The down payment on their house, $50,000. Steve's business degree that he never finished, another $40,000. His startup that failed after 6 months, $25,000. Bob was doing the math in his head, his expression growing darker with each figure. And now, I continued, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper, my own son thinks he can just walk in here and take it all. Like I'm some doddering old fool who doesn't know the difference between a Phillips head and a flat head. I turned back to face my brother, and something in my expression made him sit up straighter. Well, here's something Steve doesn't know about his old man. You don't survive 30 years in construction without learning how to handle people who try to cheat you. Bob leaned forward, recognizing the tone in my voice. It was the same one I used when a contractor tried to deliver substandard materials or when a client thought they could skip out on payment. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, I said, settling back into my chair with the deliberate calm of a man who'd made a decision, that it's time to remind my son that the foundation of this family empire has my name on it, not his. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, stopping at a familiar name. You remember Jim Patterson, the lawyer who handled our incorporation papers? Of course. Well, Jim's about to have a very interesting Monday morning. I set the phone down and looked at Bob, a smile playing at the corners of my mouth. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a craftsman who'd been handed shoddy materials and decided to show everyone what real quality looked like. See, Bob, there's something about construction that Steve never understood. Before you can build something new, sometimes you have to tear down what's already there. And when it comes to demolition, I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle between us. Nobody swings a sledgehammer better than the man who built the building in the first place. Instead of driving straight home from the cabin, I made a detour to downtown. Jim Patterson's law office was in one of those old brick buildings that had weathered decades of city changes. Solid, reliable, built to last. Just like the relationships I valued. Jim was waiting for me in his office, the power of attorney documents spread across his mahogany desk like evidence at a crime scene. He'd been my lawyer for 15 years, handling everything from business incorporation to property acquisitions. If anyone could make sense of this mess, it was him. So, Jim said, adjusting his reading glasses as I settled into the chair across from him, tell me exactly what happened up at the cabin. I walked him through the whole sequence. The birthday celebration, Steve's friendly approach, my agreement to sign over power of attorney, and then Sunday morning's bombshell about moving out of my own house. Jim listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on his legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. Well, the good news is you haven't actually transferred ownership of anything yet, he said, tapping his pen against the documents. Power of attorney gives Steve the legal right to act on your behalf, but it doesn't transfer ownership. That would require separate documentation. I felt a small weight lift from my shoulders. And the bad news? The bad news is that power of attorney is still significant. He could theoretically make financial decisions, enter into contracts, even sell property if he wanted to. All in your name. Jim's expression was grim. The question is, did he pressure you into signing this? I thought about it carefully. The evening breeze, the family celebration, Steve's enthusiastic pitch about my retirement. Not exactly pressure, more like manipulation. He made it sound like he was doing me a favor. Jim made another note. Were you given time to review the documents? Did you have independent legal counsel present? Neither. Michelle said they'd already had lawyers prepare everything. I just signed where they told me to. Jim's eyebrows rose. That's interesting. Very interesting. He stood up and walked to his filing cabinet. Let me make some calls this afternoon. I want to review the exact language of this power of attorney, and I want to understand what your son's next moves might be. What kind of calls? Well, first, I'll contact the firms that likely drafted this document. There are only a few in town that handle this type of work, and they all know me. Jim pulled out a thick folder labeled with my name. Then I'll reach out to your bank, your business partners, the property management company. If Steve is planning to make moves, we need to know about them before they happen. I nodded, feeling like I was finally getting my footing back. What else can we do? For now, nothing hasty. We understand our legal position, and we prepare our options. Jim sat back down and fixed me with a serious look. But I need you to understand something. If your son is planning what I think he's planning, we may need to take some aggressive defensive measures. Such as freezing accounts, challenging the power of attorney in court, potentially filing criminal charges if we can prove fraud or coercion. Jim's voice was steady, professional. Are you prepared for that kind of fight? Against your own son? I looked out the window at the busy street below, watching people go about their Monday afternoon routines. Normal people with normal problems. Jim, I spent 30 years building something from nothing. I won't let anyone, Not even my son tear it down based on lies and manipulation. Good. Then let me make those calls. An hour later, I was pulling into my own driveway for what might be the last time as the homeowner. The house looked the same as always. The red brick I'd chosen because it reminded me of my childhood home, the oak trees I'd planted when Steve was in elementary school, the wraparound porch I'd added for family barbecues. Steve's car was already in the driveway, parked in my usual spot. A small thing, but it felt deliberate. I found him in the living room, sitting in my favorite chair, talking animatedly on his phone. When he saw me come in, he wrapped up the call quickly. "Dad, how was the drive back?" His voice was cheerful, but there was something different in his eyes, a sense of ownership, like he was already thinking of this as his house. "Fine," I said simply. "I need some time to pack up my things." Of course, of course. Take all the time you need." He gestured around the room like a gracious host. "I know this is a big transition." Michelle appeared from the kitchen, carrying a cup of coffee in a mug I'd bought on a vacation to Colorado 5 years ago. She smiled at me with that perfectly practiced expression she used when she wanted something. "We were just talking about how to make this as easy as possible for you," she said, settling onto the couch. "We found some really nice senior living communities that might be perfect. Active lifestyle, no maintenance worries." Senior living communities. I was 68 years old, in perfect health, and they were already planning to warehouse me like a piece of outdated equipment. "That's thoughtful," I said, keeping my voice neutral, "but I think I'll handle my own living arrangements." I headed upstairs to my bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. This was the house I'd designed and built myself. I'd chosen every fixture, installed every piece of trim, painted every room. And now I was packing a suitcase like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. As I folded clothes and gathered personal items, my mind kept circling back to the same questions. How had it come to this? The little boy who used to follow me around construction sites, asking endless questions about hammers and saws and measuring tape, when had he become this calculating stranger? I remembered teaching Steve to ride a bike in the driveway below. He must have been 6 or 7, all scraped knees and determined concentration. When he finally got it, wobbling down the street with the biggest grin I'd ever seen, he'd shouted back at me, "Dad, did you see? Did you see me do it?" That same boy who'd been so proud to make his father proud. Where had he gone? I packed conservatively, just the essentials. Clothes, some important documents, family photos that meant something to me. As I worked, I could hear Steve and Michelle talking downstairs, their voices carried by the same excellent acoustic sticks I'd built into this house. Much easier than we thought. Old man's practically doing it himself. Should have the deed transferred by Friday. Each snippet felt like a nail being driven into the coffin of our relationship. But I kept packing methodically, taking only what was mine, leaving everything else exactly as it was. 45 minutes later, I carried my single suitcase downstairs. Steve and Michelle were waiting by the front door, both of them wearing expressions of concern that looked about as genuine as a $3 bill. "That's all you're taking?" Michelle asked, eyeing my small bag. "It's all I need for now," I replied. Steve stepped forward, and for a moment, I thought he might actually show some emotion about his father leaving the family home. Instead, he extended his hand for a businesslike handshake. "This is the right thing, Dad. You'll see. This way, you can really enjoy your retirement without all the stress." I looked at his hand for a long moment, then shook it. His grip was firm, confident, the handshake of a man who thought he'd just won the lottery. "Take care of the place," I said simply. As I walked toward my truck, I could see them in my peripheral vision, standing in the doorway of my house. Michelle had her arm around Steve's waist, and both of them were smiling, the satisfied smiles of people who just pulled off the con of their lives. Steve even raised his hand in a little wave, like he was seeing off an old friend after a pleasant visit. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway, watching the house disappear in my rearview mirror. They had no idea that their smiles were about to become a very distant memory. They'd played their hand, thinking they were chess masters moving pieces around a helpless old man. But every good contractor knows that before you can see the finished product, you have to trust the process. And right now, The process was just getting started. The call from Jim came at 7:30 the next morning. Right as I was finishing my coffee in the small motel room I'd rented downtown, the Riverside Inn wasn't much to look at, but it was clean, quiet, and most importantly, it was mine for as long as I needed it. "Good morning." Jim's voice carried that particular satisfaction that lawyers get when they've found the perfect legal maneuver. I could practically hear him grinning through the phone. "I hope you slept well, because I've got some very interesting news." I set down my coffee mug and settled back in the uncomfortable chair. His excitement was infectious, like a contractor who just discovered the previous builder had cut corners everywhere. "I'm listening." "First, the power of attorney your son had drafted, it's got more holes than a construction site fence. Whoever wrote it either doesn't know what they're doing, or they assumed you'd never have it reviewed by competent counsel." A smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Jim's voice had that prosecutorial edge that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. "What kind of holes?" "The biggest one. No witness signatures from neutral parties. In this state, for a power of attorney involving assets over a certain threshold, you need 2 witnesses who aren't beneficiaries. Steve and Michelle signed as witnesses to your signature." Jim chuckled, and I could almost see him shaking his head in disbelief. "That invalidates the entire document." "You're kidding." "I never kid about legal incompetence, but it gets better. I made those calls yesterday afternoon, and I found out some very interesting things about your son's recent activities." His tone shifted, becoming darker, more serious, like he was about to deliver the really bad news. I leaned forward, suddenly very interested. "Such as?" "Such as the fact that he's already been making inquiries about selling 2 of your rental properties. Called 3 different real estate agents last week, asking for market evaluations." Jim's voice hardened with professional outrage. "Before he even talked to you at the cabin." The betrayal hit like a sledgehammer to the chest. Steve had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. The friendly birthday celebration, the concerned son routine, all of it had been theater. "There's more," Jim continued, his voice taking on that relentless quality prosecutors use when they're building an airtight case. "He also contacted your business insurance carrier, trying to get himself added as a primary beneficiary on the company policy. And here's the really interesting part. He's been meeting with commercial loan officers about using your properties as collateral for a new business venture." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city I'd helped build with my own hands. Half the commercial buildings in the downtown area had my company's stamp on them somewhere. "How do you know all this?" "Because in a town this size, everybody talks to everybody. Your banker, Pete Morrison, called me personally yesterday evening, said Steve had been pressuring him about expediting some account transfers, and Pete wanted to make sure everything was legitimate before he processed anything." I could hear the satisfaction in Jim's voice, the pleasure of a professional who'd done his homework thoroughly. Pete Morrison. I'd been banking with him for 20 years, had helped him finance his own house when he was just starting out. Good man, solid as concrete. "So what are our options?" I asked. "Well, first we file an emergency injunction this morning. That freezes all your assets pending a court review of the power of attorney. Steve won't be able to touch a penny or make any property decisions." Jim's voice carried the confidence of a man who'd done this dance many times before. The mental image of Steve trying to access frozen accounts made me smile for the first time in days. "What else?" "We challenge the power of attorney in court on grounds of fraud, coercion, and improper execution. Given the witness signature issue alone, we'll win that easily. Then we file a restraining order preventing any further attempts to manipulate or defraud you." His tone was almost gleeful now, like a kid with a new toolbox. "And if Steve tries to fight it?" Jim's laugh was cold and sharp. "Then we get really aggressive. Elder abuse laws in this state are very strict. Attempting to fraudulently obtain power of attorney from a parent can result in criminal charges. Plus, if we can prove he was planning to sell your assets for his own benefit, that's theft by deception." I felt something settle in my chest, not satisfaction exactly, but a sense of justice finally taking shape. How long will all this take? The injunction goes into effect within hours of filing. The court hearing for the power of attorney challenge should happen within a week. Your son is about to discover that legal shortcuts have a way of becoming very expensive mistakes. There was steel in Jim's voice now, the sound of a man preparing for war. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a comfortable chair in the motel lobby, reading the morning paper and waiting. The injunction had been filed at 9 a.m. sharp. By my calculation, Steve would be finding out about his frozen assets right about now. My phone buzzed. Steve's number. I let it go to voicemail. It buzzed again 30 seconds later. Then again. By 10:30 a.m., I'd received 8 missed calls and 3 text messages. The first text, sent at 10:15, "Dad, there's some kind of problem with the bank. Call me." I could practically hear the confusion in those words, the first crack in his confidence. The second, 10:22, "They're saying the accounts are frozen. This has to be a mistake." Now there was panic creeping in, the realization that his grand plan was falling apart. The third at 10:28, "Dad, answer your phone." Pure desperation. All caps, the digital equivalent of shouting. I turned the phone off and ordered another cup of coffee. An hour later, I turned it back on to find 14 missed calls and 7 new text messages. The progression was beautiful in its desperation. "Dad, whatever you think is happening, we can work it out. The lawyers say you filed some kind of court order. This is crazy. Please call me back. Michelle is freaking out. We can't access any of the business accounts. People are asking questions. This is hurting the company. You're hurting your own business. Fine. You want to play hardball? We'll see you in court. Dad, please. I'm your son. We're family." Each message showed the progression from confusion to anger to bargaining to desperate pleading. It was like watching someone realize their house was built on sand. I saved every message, then forwarded them all to Jim. Evidence of increasing desperation would be useful in court. At 2 p.m., Michelle called. I answered on the third ring. "What have you done?" Her voice was shrill, panicked, all pretense of sweetness stripped away. Gone was the honey-tongued manipulator from yesterday. "Steve can't even pay the office rent." "Hello, Michelle," I said calmly, settling deeper into the lobby chair. I could practically taste her fear through the phone. "How's your day going?" "This isn't funny. You've locked us out of everything. The whole business is paralyzed." She was shouting now, her voice cracking with stress. Interesting choice of words, I mused, enjoying the way she seemed to be hyperventilating on the other end. Paralyzed. That's exactly how I felt yesterday when my own son told me to pack my bags and get out of my own house. That's not. We didn't mean. She was scrambling now, trying to find some explanation that didn't sound like the calculated theft it actually was. I could hear her breathing becoming more rapid, more shallow. You know what the funny thing is, Michelle? I spent 30 years building something solid, something that could weather any storm. But I never thought the storm would come from inside my own family. I could hear Steve in the background, his voice agitated and demanding, ordering her to hang up the phone. But she was too panicked to think straight, too desperate for a solution. "What do you want?" she finally asked, her voice small and defeated. The fight had gone out of her completely. "Right now, I want to finish reading my newspaper, maybe take a walk around town, visit some of the buildings I helped construct. It's amazing how much free time you have when you're not worrying about ungrateful children trying to steal your life's work." We weren't stealing. Her voice was pleading now, almost whimpering. "Michelle," I interrupted, my voice taking on the tone I used with subcontractors who tried to use inferior materials. Cold, final, brooking no argument. I've been in construction for 30 years. I know the difference between renovation and demolition. What you and Steve were planning, that was demolition. The line went quiet except for her ragged, panicked breathing. But here's the thing about demolition, I continued, watching pedestrians walk past the lobby window, feeling completely at peace for the first time in days. It only works if you understand the building's structure. And lucky for me, I'm the one who designed this particular structure from the ground up. I hung up before she could respond, cutting off what sounded like the beginning of a sob. By evening, my phone had logged 26 missed calls and 15 text messages. The tone had shifted from anger to pleading to outright begging. My personal favorite was Steve's 5:47 p.m. text. "Dad, I made a mistake. Can we please just talk?" The desperation in those words was palpable. The arrogant young man who'd kicked me out of my own house had been replaced by someone who was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of his error. I deleted every message without reading them fully, poured myself a glass of whiskey from the bottle at the liquor store across the street, and settled in to watch the evening news. Tomorrow, Jim would file the additional paperwork. Tomorrow, Steve would learn that power of attorney obtained through deception wasn't just invalid, it was criminal. But tonight, I was going to enjoy the sound of silence, broken only by the increasingly frantic buzzing of a phone I had no intention of answering. The knock on my motel room door came at 6:30 a.m. on Friday morning. I'd been expecting it. Through the peephole, I could see Steve and Michelle standing in the hallway, both looking like they hadn't slept in days. Steve's usually perfect appearance was disheveled, wrinkled shirt, unshaven face, the hollow-eyed look of a man whose world was collapsing. Michelle stood slightly behind him, her designer clothes rumpled, her makeup smeared from what looked like recent tears. I took my time opening the door, savoring the moment. Well, look what the cat dragged in. Dad, please. Steve's voice was hoarse, desperate. His usual confidence had evaporated completely. We need to talk. This whole situation has gotten out of hand. I leaned against the doorframe, not inviting them in. Michelle was clutching Steve's arm like a lifeline, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his sleeve. She looked terrified. Out of hand? I raised an eyebrow. Son, this is getting started. You might want to check your phone. I think you've got some missed calls. Steve's face went pale. He fumbled for his phone with shaking hands, and I watched as his expression shifted from confusion to horror as he scrolled through his messages. What is this? His voice cracked like a teenager's. That, I said calmly, is the sound of chickens coming home to roost. Looks like your employees found out their paychecks bounced, and your subcontractors are wondering why their payments haven't gone through. Oh, and that big Morrison project? The client called this morning. Something about breach of contract. Michelle let out a small whimper. But we can fix this. We just need access to the accounts. The accounts that you tried to steal from me? I interrupted, enjoying the way she flinched. Those accounts are going to stay frozen until the court sorts out your little fraud scheme. Steve's phone started ringing. Then Michelle's. Both phones buzzing incessantly like angry wasps. Steve glanced at his screen and went even paler. That's probably Rick from the concrete company, I mused. He gets cranky when people don't pay their bills. And that one's probably Jenny from the office. She's got 2 kids and a mortgage. She's not going to be happy about missing her paycheck. Dad, you don't understand, Steve pleaded, his voice breaking. If we can't make payroll, people will quit. The whole company will collapse. Now you're getting it, I said with satisfaction. Funny how that works, isn't it? When you can't access money that isn't really yours, everything falls apart pretty quickly. Michelle stepped forward, mascara streaking down her cheeks. We'll give it back. The power of attorney, the house, everything. Just please, unfreeze the accounts. Steve will lose everything. Everything? I tilted my head thoughtfully. You mean like how I was going to lose everything when you threw me out of my own house? Like how I was going to lose the business I built with my bare hands? That kind of everything? Steve's phone rang again. This time he answered it, his voice shaky. Hello? Rick, I know there's been a delay. I could hear the angry voice on the other end, even from several feet away. Rick wasn't just cranky, he was furious. Steve held the phone away from his ear as the tirade continued. $23,000. Rick's voice was loud enough for all of us to hear. My crew worked overtime on your job, and now you're telling me the check bounced? I've got families to feed, Steve. It's a banking error, Steve said weakly. We'll have it sorted out by... Banking error, my ass. I've been in business 20 years, and I've never seen a banking error that freezes every account a company has. You're either bankrupt or you're running some kind of scam. The line went dead. Steve stared at his phone like it had bitten him. That's just the beginning, I said conversationally. Wait until the electrical contractors find out, and the plumbing suppliers. Oh, and don't forget about the equipment rental company. They're probably going to want their machinery back. Michelle was openly crying now, her carefully constructed facade crumbling completely. This is insane. We're family. You can't destroy your own son's life over a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Michelle, you and Steve planned to steal everything I own and throw me out on the street. That's not a misunderstanding. That's theft. Steve's phone buzzed with a text. He looked at it and went white as plaster. Oh, God, the bank is calling in the business loan. They want the full amount by Monday, or they're seizing the collateral. Which collateral would that be? I asked innocently. The equipment. The trucks. The office building. Steve's voice was barely a whisper. Everything. Ah, yes, I nodded. The office building that I put up as collateral when I co-signed your loan. The equipment that's registered in my name. The trucks that are titled to my company. Funny how that works out. Michelle grabbed my arm, her desperation palpable. Please, we'll do anything. We'll sign whatever you want. Just don't let this destroy everything. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her tear-streaked face. Anything? That's interesting, because I've got a list. Steve looked up from his phone with hollow eyes. What kind of list? The kind that starts with you resigning from every position in my company. Both of you. Effective immediately. I pulled out a folded paper from my pocket. Jim drew up the paperwork yesterday, complete renunciation of any claim to power of attorney, resignation from all corporate positions, and acknowledgement that you attempted to defraud me. If we sign that, we'll have nothing, Steve said, his voice cracking. That's right, I replied evenly. You'll have exactly what I was going to have after you kicked me out of my own house. Nothing. Funny how that works. Michelle's phone rang. She answered it with a shaking voice. Hello? Michelle, this is Carol from the office. I just got a call from the health insurance company. They're saying our policy has been canceled, and my daughter has a doctor's appointment tomorrow. Michelle hung up without answering, her face crumpling. That would be because the insurance premiums haven't been paid, I explained helpfully. Hard to pay bills when your accounts are frozen. I imagine Carol's not the only employee who's going to have problems. Steve's phone rang again. This time he didn't answer, just stared at the screen as call after call came in. His shoulders sagged in defeat. The Harrison Project, he said quietly. If we can't pay the crew, they'll walk off the job. The client will sue us for breach of contract. The reputation we've built. The reputation I built, I corrected. Over 30 years. The reputation you were planning to cash in on while throwing your old man in the garbage. Dad, Steve started, then stopped. For the first time, he really looked at me. Not as an obstacle to be managed or a problem to be solved, but as the man who'd raised him, taught him everything he knew, and trusted him with everything he owned. I'm sorry, he whispered, and for a moment, he sounded like the little boy who used to help me at construction sites. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know how I became this person. You became this person, I said quietly, when you decided that what I built with my own hands was yours to take. When you looked at your father and saw an obstacle instead of the man who gave you everything. Michelle pulled out a pen with shaking hands. Where do we sign? Right there, I pointed to the signature lines. All of it. Complete renunciation, resignation, and acknowledgement of attempted fraud. They signed quickly, desperately, their names scrawled with the urgency of people trying to stop a building from collapsing on top of them. But it was too late for that. The collapse had already begun. Now what? Steve asked, handing back the papers. Now? I folded the documents and put them in my pocket. Now you get to find out what it's like to start over with nothing, just like I did 30 years ago. The difference is, I did it through honest work. You'll have to do it while explaining to everyone in town why your business collapsed and your employees didn't get paid. As if on cue, both their phones started ringing again. Steve looked at his phone, then at me. Answer it, I said. Those are your former employees. They deserve an explanation. Steve answered his phone with a trembling voice. Hello, Jenny? Steve, what the hell is going on? My mortgage payment bounced because my paycheck bounced, and now I've got overdraft fees. I trusted you. I could hear the anger and betrayal in Jenny's voice, and I saw Steve flinch as if he'd been slapped. I know, he said weakly. There's been a situation. I'm going to fix this. Fix it how? The bank is saying there's some kind of legal hold on all the accounts. Are we even going to have jobs next week? Steve looked at me pleadingly, but I just shrugged. This was his mess now. I don't know, Jenny. I honestly don't know. The line went dead. Steve stared at his phone, then slowly put it away. 30 years, I said quietly. That's how long it took me to build something that could support a dozen families. You destroyed it in 4 days. We can rebuild, Michelle said desperately. We can start over, work together. No, I said firmly. You can start over. I already built my empire once. This time, I think I'll just watch from the sidelines while you figure out how to clean up the mess you made. I stepped back into my motel room and began to close the door. Dad, wait, Steve called out. What happens now? To us, I mean. I paused at the threshold. Now? Now you get to experience what you were so eager to give me. You get to pack your things and find somewhere else to live, because that house you thought you owned, it's mine again. You get to look for new jobs because the company you thought you could steal, you're no longer welcome there. And you get to explain to everyone, the employees, the clients, the contractors, why their trust in you was misplaced. And then I looked at my son, this stranger who'd tried to destroy everything I'd built, and felt something that might have been pity. Then you do what I did 30 years ago. You roll up your sleeves and you start building something of your own. But this time, you do it with your own name, your own reputation, and your own money. No shortcuts, no inheritance, no stepping on someone else's foundation. I closed the door, leaving them standing in the hallway with their ringing phones and their shattered dreams. Through the thin walls, I could hear Michelle crying and Steve trying to answer increasingly angry calls from employees and contractors. Justice, it turned out, didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered, and sometimes it sounded exactly like a phone that wouldn't stop ringing. The next Monday morning, I called Jim and had all the accounts unfrozen. Within hours, I was cutting checks for every employee who'd missed their payroll, covering Jenny's overdraft fees, paying Rick his $23,000 plus interest, and settling every contractor in full. Nobody should suffer because of my son's mistakes, I told Jim. These people trusted our family name, and that name still means something. Steve and Michelle had gotten exactly what they'd planned for me. Nothing. No house, no business, no trust from the community that had once respected them. They'd moved away quietly, their reputations in ruins, forced to start over with nothing but the shame of what they'd tried to do. My phone rang occasionally, Steve calling to apologize, to beg for another chance. I never answered. Some bridges once burned don't get rebuilt. The boy I'd raised was gone, replaced by a stranger who'd seen his father as nothing more than an obstacle to easy money. Here's what I learned. Respect isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn, day by day, choice by choice. Trust is like a foundation. It takes years to build properly, but it can be destroyed in minutes if someone takes a sledgehammer to it. Steve had tried to force me into retirement, to push me aside as outdated and irrelevant. Instead, he'd reminded me why I'd been successful in the first place. Not because I was the smartest or richest man in the room, but because when I gave my word, I kept it. When people trusted me with their livelihoods, I treated that trust like the sacred thing it was. In construction, we have a saying, measure twice, cut once. Steve had been so eager to claim his inheritance that he'd never stopped to measure what he was actually cutting away. Not just my trust, but his own integrity. Not just my respect, but his reputation in a community where your word is your bond. The real inheritance I'd wanted to leave him wasn't money or property. It was something more valuable, the knowledge that anything worth having is worth working for, that respect comes from keeping your promises, and that family means protecting each other, not preying on each other. He'd thrown that inheritance away for quick money and easy power. In doing so, he'd lost something far more precious than any business or bank account. He'd lost his father's respect. And unlike frozen accounts or legal documents, that was something that couldn't be restored with a phone call to a lawyer. Some mistakes are too expensive to fix. Some bridges are too broken to rebuild. And sometimes, the hardest lesson a parent can teach is that love doesn't mean immunity from consequences. There was work to do, foundations to pour, and structures to build that would last for generations. Just like I'd always done. Just like I always would. Because that's what real builders do. They create things that endure. Things that can weather any storm, even the ones that come from within their own family. And if someone wants to inherit that legacy, they'll have to earn it, one honest day's work at a time. No shortcuts, no exceptions, no second chances. That's how you build something that lasts.